We're going to be talking today about PRIDE skills, otherwise known as positive behavior management in the early childhood classroom setting. This is a training that is classroom modified version of parent-child interaction therapy, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Stav Bennett. I'm an early childhood mental health consultant with the State of Delaware's Division of Prevention and Behavioral Health Services. And just a brief introduction into what I do. Myself and my colleagues go throughout the state, go into early child care settings, and we work with teachers and staff on helping to implement tips and strategies in the classroom for challenging behaviors. And so teachers that are experiencing challenging behaviors from preschool-age children will refer to our program, which is free, and we will go in and work with the teachers and staff on different types of consultations that will allow them to get the support they need to help the child be successful in the classroom. Part of what we do is this training and other trainings that provide them with professional development. And this is one of our most popular trainings because it is able to be used with a wide variety of children. When I talk about PCIT, or Parent-Child Interaction Therapy, I'm talking about an empirically supported treatment for disruptive behavior disorders and ADHD in young children. Oftentimes we get a lot of questions about what do we do with kids that are as young as 2. In previous years, it's been difficult to direct parents and child care staff in terms of getting help for children that are very, very young. Because there's often been a misconception that children that are that young aren't able to be treated, and that's not true. Actually, what we found is that parent-child interaction therapy is a very, very effective treatment for kids ages 2 to 7 who are displaying challenging behaviors at home or in the community. So a lot of times we'll find that parents are very frustrated with their child's behaviors and they don't know where to turn in terms of how to get support for learning skills and tools in order to manage those behaviors. PCIT really places an emphasis on improving the quality of parent-child relationships. That is of utmost importance, and we've found that foundation of the parent-child relationship is so important in getting the things like compliance and positive behaviors from kids that we need. And we find that the parent-child interaction patterns that are happening between kids with challenging behaviors and their parents could be altered so that parents are able to learn new skills and learn new ways of responding to certain behaviors that they might be seeing at home. There are 2 components of parent-child interaction therapy. One is called child-directed interaction, and that's what we'll be talking about today in terms of PRIDE skills training. What you will be learning in PRIDE skills training is essentially that child-directed interaction phase of PCIT. And what that is a number of skills called PRIDE skills that focus on enhancing the parent-child attachment, or in the case of the classroom, the teacher-child attachment, positive parenting or caregiving, and child social skills using play therapy skills. And that's where it becomes important, because these skills that you're going to be learning about today are actually play therapy skills that you would be learning in a therapeutic environment like therapy, outpatient therapy. And they're really designed to help foster that connection between you and the child. What we know is that just like a house, without building that foundation first of that connection, that relationship between a parent and a child, then we can't expect to see other types of positive behaviors like compliance from kids. Kids, what they found through research in PCIT is that if there is no relationship present, then there's not going to be positive behavior. So we need to develop those positive relationships first before we see the positive behaviors. The second phase of parent-child interaction therapy is called parent-directed interaction. That's your discipline phase. That's where we teach parents how to use clear directives and consistent follow-through. And like I said before, those are things that we can't develop until after there's a foundation of a relationship between parent and child or teacher and child. Typically, PCIT requires about 16 to 20 weekly sessions, and it utilizes a life skills coaching of the parent during parent-child interactions. And what that means are there are two main trainings that the parent will get with the therapist in order to learn the skills needed. And then once those skills are learned, they are practiced in session with the child while the therapist coaches the parent live as they play with the child. Once the parent has mastered those skills, they move on to the next session or phase of the treatment. Once the entire parent-child interaction therapy skills are mastered, then the parent will be able to complete the therapy. What we're going to talk about now are the PRIDE skills, and PRIDE stands for praise, reflection, imitation, description, and enthusiasm. And these are the 5 skills that you're going to be using in small group or one-on-one interactions with the children in your classroom. Some of these skills you have probably been doing before in your classroom, and some of them are going to seem very unnatural, and we're going to go over all of that. But these are the 5 skills that you're going to be wanting to use in terms of, again, 5-minute interactions with the kids. One thing I want to note is that these 5-minute interactions with the kids are going to be interactions that are not structured by the teacher. So you are going to want to do these interactions in during times like free play or centers, where you are not leading the play or the activity, but you're allowing the child to lead the play. Before we get started on talking about the PRIDE skills, I just want to talk a little bit about why play is so important and why it's so important to use these skills during play. We know play is important for developing certain skills in early childhood, skills like problem-solving skills, conflict resolution, communicating your needs to others, and helping to make sense of the world. We know that play allows for trying out new skills, and it is a great time to teach. I think a lot of times I often get from teachers how important it is that they need to teach their ABCs and 1, 2, 3s before kindergarten. That has become something that has been critical to the preschool environment in recent years. Previously, those things were more important to learn in kindergarten, but now we're seeing that they're more important to learn earlier and earlier, and preschool teachers are feeling very pressured to teach kids about academic skills. But what we know is that what's most important to learn in the preschool years are those social-emotional skills. Those are the things that are going to allow for better learning in the future. So it's really important to use play to teach. What we know is that developmentally, kids are better able to learn when they play rather than in a setting in which they are lectured or taught to. And so it's really important to understand that playtime can also be a time to teach, and we're going to talk about that in terms of the skills that you're going to learn today. The first skill that we're going to learn about is called praise, and praise is something that all teachers tell me all the time that they do, and I see it oftentimes in the classroom, a lot of praise, but there's a specific type of praise that we know is more important to use with preschool-age children, and that's what we call labeled praise. There are 2 types of praises: labeled praises and unlabeled praises. Unlabeled praises are your praises such as good job, great going, thank you. They're very vague. They don't specify what it is you like about the behavior. They're nice to hear, but they don't modify behavior. What we know about preschool-age children is that they need specifics. They need you to be specific as to talking about what you like from them. So the praise that we most want to use is called labeled praise. And labeled praise is specific. and it's clear in letting the child know what you like. So some examples of that would be, I like the way you're playing so gently with the toys, or great job using your indoor voice. There's a lot of challenging behaviors in the classroom. We all can describe those challenging behaviors because that's the first thing we see in the morning. When we walk into the classroom, we see Johnny over there under the table and Sally throwing toys in the corner. And so we're able to recognize those challenging behaviors right away. And that leads to increased burnout in teachers. And so what is important for teachers to understand is that you want to start kind of changing your mindset in terms of what it is that you're seeing that's going right in the classroom versus what it is that you're seeing that's going wrong. And as soon as you start to get ahead of the behaviors in that way, you'll see the kids do those behaviors more. The more attention you display towards behaviors, the more those behaviors happen. And so we want to praise specific behaviors that we like. It's nice to hear, I like the way you're making that tower, but I want you to think about praising positive behaviors that you want to see more of in the classroom. Things like using your indoor voice, or sitting on your bottom, or sharing with your friends. Those are all types of behaviors that we want to increase in the classroom. And so as soon as you see it, say it. As soon as you see a child who is sitting on their bottom and sharing with a friend, you want to point that out. You don't want to let that go by, because the child needs to know what it is that you like. And so those labeled praises are the praises that you want to spend more time on noticing and pointing out in the child's behaviors. When teachers ask me what strategy is most important for me to use in the classroom, I always say increasing the frequency of your labeled praises. Oftentimes, on average, my fellow consultants and I see about 5 labeled praises per hour in the classroom, and that's really just not enough to change the dynamics of the classroom and to increase positive behaviors in the kids. And so if you really want to work on making the classroom environment more positive and seeing more of those positive behaviors, you want to do at least 25 to 30 labeled praises per classroom per hour. One thing that I like to do with my teachers is I'll have them put 25 paper clips in one pocket, and every time they give a labeled praise to a student, they take it out and they put it in another pocket. And by the end of the hour, all 25 paper clips should be in the other pocket. And so that's how they know that they're using the right amount of labeled praises. Sometimes it feels like you're overdoing it, and that's what we want. We want you to overdo it, because the more you overdo it, the more enthusiastic you are, the more kids will respond to that. Kids like corny. I'm corny in the classroom. Great job using your sharing hands. I love the way that you shared with me. Those kinds of labeled praises are what really matters to kids, and so we really need to see more of that. I'll give you an example as to why it's so important to develop relationships with the kids before getting any type of compliance from them. Let's say that you were at home, you were in the midst of a blizzard, you're by yourself, you're snuggled and warm, and you're really excited to just spend some time by yourself, and you get a phone call. And the phone call is somebody you haven't heard from in 20 years. And that person is telling you, oh my gosh, I am getting evicted. You need to come help me move out of my apartment. You're most likely to think, what is this person calling me for? I don't know you anymore. I don't have a relationship with you anymore. Why am I going to help you? We might still help them, but that's our first initial thought. Now let's say the same example is happening. You're in the midst of a blizzard, you're nice and cozy, warm at home, and your best friend calls you and says, I'm getting evicted, I need help moving out. I'm gonna help them right away because they need me. Because you have a relationship with that person. And having a relationship with a person means you are more likely to work with them. You are more likely to help them. And the same goes for kids. Without a relationship, kids don't want to work with you. They don't want to respect the things that you're saying. They don't want to comply with you. And so that relationship is so important in terms of getting the behaviors we eventually want to see, that compliance, that respectful behavior, the nice behaviors that we want to see from kids, the sharing behaviors. Those are all things that we will eventually see, but as long as we develop the foundation of relationship first. The next skill that we're going to be talking about in Pride are reflections. Now, when we talk about praise is easy. Praise is the first thing you learn when you become a teacher, how important it is to praise kids. And so it's something that we do naturally. Reflections, on the other hand, are not something that we do naturally. Reflections are essentially parroting back what the child has said to you in the form of a statement. I'm going to give you an example of what we typically do in terms of our interactions with kids. You're playing with a child, and the child will say, "I drew a tree." And we tend to say back, "You drew a tree?" We tend to question rather than validate. One reason why it's so important to validate a child by repeating back in the form of a statement is because it shows that you are agreeing with what they're saying and you're validating what they're saying. Another reason is because if we question back what a child has said to us, it gives the impression that we are not listening. It also gives the impression that we disapprove, like I said before. And so you want to make sure that as long as the child is using appropriate talk, that you are reflecting back in the form of a statement rather than questioning. So another example of this is the child would say in the midst of play, "The doggy has a black nose." So rather than say, "The doggy has a black nose," do you hear my inflection? It's going up. And so we want to avoid that. What we want to do instead is we want to say, "The doggy does have a black nose." One thing I recommend to teachers in terms of remembering how to use a statement instead of a question is to put the emphasis on the verb. "The doggy does have a black nose." And that helps you make it a statement and validate instead of that inflection at the end. Why is it important to reflect? Some reasons we talked about were it helps to validate what the child has said, and it shows that you're listening to the conversation, and also that you accept and understand what the child is saying. Now, there's a caveat to this. If the child says something inappropriate, we do not want to reflect. I have an example of this in a classroom that I was in. The teacher was being coached on reflections, and the child was telling her story about going to McDonald's the night before for dinner with their family. And the teacher was doing a great job of reflecting back what the child was saying. The child said, "I went to McDonald's last night," and the teacher said, "You did go to McDonald's last night." And the child said, "And I had chicken nuggets because they're my favorite," and the teacher said, "You did have chicken nuggets because they're your favorite." And then the child said, "And then we went home and Daddy yelled at us because he's such a poo-poo head." And the teacher said, "Daddy is a poo-poo head." And I said, "Wait, you want to hold on a second, because that's not necessarily what we want to be reflecting back and validating." And so the question is, what do you do in a situation like that? Let's say the child says something inappropriate, because that's what kids do. So what you want to do is you want to ignore. And we're going to talk about active ignoring in just a little bit and why it's so important in the midst of using pride skills. But particularly in this case, it's so important because ignoring shows that you don't approve. If we go ahead and start telling the child, "Oh no, that's not okay to say Daddy is a poo-poo head," then we are putting attention on that. And if you've got attention-seeking kids in your classroom, anything you put attention on, they will do more of. And so ignoring shows them that it's not okay to say those words without pointing it out. And so what I coached the teacher on doing is we stopped what we were saying, we stopped all of the reflections, and then we waited until the child continued the story, and then we started reflecting again. It's important to understand that when you are ignoring what the child is saying, that you are also letting them know that you don't accept what they're saying if it's inappropriate. And so when we reflect back talk from a child, we want to make sure that we're reflecting appropriate talk and appropriate talk only. Another thing that reflections do that are really important in the early child care setting is that those kids that have speech delays or simply need more vocabulary, reflections are a great way to improve the child's speech. Speech therapists actually use a technique called expansion. And expansion is essentially reflecting back what a child is saying, but adding to it as well. And this is one of those situations in which you can insert a teaching moment without teaching. If the child says, "I'm driving the train," and you would reflect back, "You are driving the red train." And that's a great teaching moment because it teaches them about colors, while also reflecting back what they're saying. Another example of this would be correcting a child's speech while reflecting back. So a child says, "I brung my backpack," and you can say, "Yes, you brought your backpack," rather than saying, "It's not brung, it's brought." Rather than putting emphasis on what they got wrong, we want to just correct without pointing out their mistakes. Again, you want to remember that the pride skills are all about creating a foundation of safety and connection between you and the child, and so pointing out mistakes is not going to be conducive to doing that. What you'll find when you do reflections with kids is that the more reflections you do, the more kids will talk. The next skill we're going to be talking about is imitation. And imitation is important because it allows you to show the child that you approve of the activity that they're doing, and it gets you involved in that activity. Imitation is essentially playing with what the child is playing with, at the same time teaching the child how to play with others and how to take turns by showing them appropriate play. And so example of this would be the child drawing circles on a piece of paper and you simply drawing circles as well. And you can even say, "I'm taking my time drawing circles on a piece of paper." Or if the child says, "I put a nose on the potato head," you saying, "I'm putting a nose on Mr. Potato Head too." So the more you mirror what the child does, the more you increase the child's mirroring of the things that you do. So the more appropriate in your play you are, the more appropriate their play will be. So the next skill we're going to be talking about are behavioral descriptions. And I like to describe behavioral descriptions as kind of like what you would do if you were a sports commentator. If you know anything about football, you know that the commentators are kind of describing the play on the field as it's going on. And if you were to close your eyes and listen to what they're saying, you would know everything that's going on the field. And that's essentially what you're going to be doing with the kids in terms of their play. You're going to be describing what they're doing with their hands. So what that looks like is the child is taking, let's say, a blue Lego and putting it on the top of his tower. You would simply say, "You are putting the blue Lego on the top of your tower." You're literally describing as it's happening what the child is doing. One of the reasons why behavioral descriptions are so important is because it lets the child lead the play. It gives them confidence and it allows them to have ownership over play when, let's face it, kids don't have ownership over a lot of things in their lives. How many times a day do we tell kids what to do? We tell kids what to do constantly, what to wear, when to go to the bathroom, what to eat, who to play with, where to play, when to go outside. All of those things are things that we tell kids to do. And kids really don't have a lot of ownership over their lives and their choices. And so when you allow the child to lead the play, it gives them the confidence that they need in terms of building these skills that we want to see. This is something that kids never get. They never get you laser focused on what they're doing at all times. And when you're doing that, it shows the child that you're interested in what they're doing, and they love that. Another reason why behavioral descriptions are so important is because it teaches the child concepts and ideas. Things like you're putting the blue Lego on top of the tower, or you are taking the pig and you're putting it behind the barn. So those types of concepts are really important to reinforce and to model for kids. And again, it models speech. You are bringing the red Lego and you're putting it on the top of the rectangle. And so making sure that you are talking to kids and modeling speech for them is really important. And most importantly, and I think what teachers tend to see the most of, is that it really holds the child's attention on the task. We all have kids in our classroom that are hyperactive and are unable to focus on what we want them to do. And behavioral descriptions are great for those kids because it gives them what they're doing in steps, and it helps to organize their thoughts about the activity. So the more you are describing the steps they're taking in terms of their play, the slower they are in terms of the play, and the slower they are taking the play, and you'll find that they focus more on what they're doing when you describe what they're doing. This is a great example of how behavioral descriptions can help the child focus. So what we're seeing on the screen is a drawing of a Christmas tree. The child was told by the adult to draw a Christmas tree, and that was the extent of the directions. They were given no other directions besides that. So the child did what we typically see, which is kind of scrawl something out on paper and then move on to the next activity. What you'll see on the next slide is the same child asked to draw a Christmas tree, but with the addition of behavioral descriptions by the adult. So the next slide will show what it looks like when the child was given behavioral descriptions by the adult as they first started drawing the Christmas tree. So essentially the adult, as the child took the crayon to paper, started with, you are taking the crayon and you're drawing a line on the paper. And now you're drawing another line underneath. And now you're drawing a line below that. And now you're coloring in the Christmas tree. And if you can see on the drawing, not only did they draw a Christmas tree, but they also drew ornaments. They drew a star on the top. This was a kid who was really focused on completing this drawing, and that was with the help of the descriptions that the adult gave them. And so the more we are able to help them follow along with what they're doing by describing what they're doing, the more focused they are on the task. Finally, what I want to talk about is the skill of enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is really important, and it was included in the Pride skills because we found that some parents who were experiencing depression had difficulty being enthusiastic with their kids when they were giving these skills. So we would hear things like, great job putting the blue Lego on the tower, or you're putting the Lego on top of the other Lego. And they were technically using the skills as they were supposed to be used, but there was no reward to it. There was no fire. There was no enthusiasm. And so we know enthusiasm is really an integral key in terms of these skills because it reinforces to the child that you're in it with them, that you are excited about what they're doing. And kids like it when you're excited. We all know that timeout is a widely used strategy for parents to use and for teachers to use. But sometimes there are instances in which timeout doesn't work for kids. What we'll find are that kids don't really care that they're being sent to timeout. You'll say you have to go over to timeout, and the kid will say, I don't care, I wanted to go there anyway. Or they won't mind. It won't be a deterrent to their behavior. And what we find is that the reason for that is because their time in isn't powerful enough. What is time in? Time in are the times when you're using these pride skills with your kids to make it more rewarding and reinforcing for the kids. And so if time in is powerful, then time out will work because they won't want to be away from you. They won't want to be removed from this really reinforcing interaction that they've gotten with you. That's what enthusiasm does. It makes time in worth it for the kids. So I really encourage all my teachers to make sure that they are overreacting to the positive. Because that overreaction is what reinforces those positive behaviors. So now that we've talked about what to do when we're doing this 5-minute special play time, I want to talk about some of the things that we want to avoid while using pride skills. One of the things that we want to avoid using in terms of this 5-minute special play time is what we call negative talk. And negative talk is anything that contains the words can't, stop, no, don't, or quit. So we want to avoid phrasing things in a negative way because we want to avoid, like I said before, pointing out mistakes. This is a time when you are simply developing or fostering a connection with the child, and you want to make it fun. And so you want to make sure that you are you're not criticizing them in any way, or you're not making it something that points out their mistakes for them. And so things like, no, you can't put that there, or stop doing that, silly, that's not how you're supposed to do that, or no, don't move the puzzle piece that way, it goes here, or quit rapping on the desk. All of those things are things that we want to avoid, particularly during this 5 minutes of special play time, like I said, because they really inhibit fostering that connection between you and the child. Another skill that you want to avoid are commands. And when I say this to teachers, oftentimes they say, well, how am I supposed to not tell kids what to do if they're doing something wrong? And obviously, if Johnny is hitting Sally in the corner, we want to make sure that we say, Johnny, no, we keep your hands to yourself. But in terms of the play, you want to try avoid using what we call indirect or direct commands. Indirect commands are those types of commands in which we either ask a question like, hey, can you put that piece over here? Or we'll say things like, hey, let's try it this way. It's essentially an indirect way of telling them what to do. And a direct command is the opposite. It tells them what to do in a very direct way. So, no, put that puzzle piece there. That doesn't go there. You're supposed to put it here. Or don't make the grass orange. The grass is supposed to be green. Or no, that's not a rhinoceros. That's a giraffe. We want to avoid giving those commands because essentially it takes the lead away from the child. And there's going to be plenty of time to tell them the difference between a rhinoceros and a giraffe. But this is not that time. Remember, the point of the 5 minutes of special play time is really just to foster that connection. And so commands, unnecessary commands that you're giving the kids is going to take away from that. And then the final thing that we want to avoid in terms of the pride skills is asking questions. And this is probably the hardest avoid skill that teachers are asked to do, because kids are being asked questions, hundreds of questions a day. Oftentimes, like I was saying before, rapid fire questions that give them no opportunity to answer. So things like, oh, what you doing? What you making? What shape is that you're doing? Are you having fun with that, or do you want to do something else? It's very similar to what I often hear from adults getting from their significant other when they get home from work. Hey, how was your day? Do you want to have dinner, or you want to go out? Where are we going with the kids? What do you think the kids want for dinner? And you get question after question after question, and you can't even take a breath when you get into the door. And that's the way kids feel when they're bombarded with questions. They just get questions that they don't even have a chance to answer. And it can be very frustrating. And if you have kids with behavior problems in the classroom, chances are they get easily frustrated. And you want to avoid, sparking that frustration for them by just eliminating the possibility of it by eliminating questions. Now, that being said, questions are important and they have their place at other times of the day. But you got to remember, this is just 5 minutes a day that you're using these pride skills. And so you want to make sure that you are minimizing questions as much as possible, because it can take the lead away from the child. Remember, the child is in the lead during these pride skills, during this 5-minute interaction. And when you're saying, hey, what you doing? It stops the child from playing. Then they have to process what you've just asked them, and kids on average take about 5 seconds to process a question, and then they have to answer that question, and then you have just interrupted their flow of play. And some kids can get very frustrated by that. Another reason why questions can be something that we want to avoid is because they indicate disapproval. We'll say things like, oh, you putting the pig in the barn? I'll give you an example of what this feels like as an adult. Let's say that you were making a poster for your classroom, and the center director came up behind you and started saying, "Oh, you're going to use blue for that word? Oh, you're gonna use animals instead of shapes on your poster? Oh, you're thinking of making the naming the poster that? It can cause a lot of insecurity on your part. And they might just be asking you questions and not necessarily indicating disapproval or meaning to indicate disapproval, but it can feel that way. And kids are the same way. It can indicate that you're disapproving of what they're doing, even if that's not what you mean. And so we want to kind of take all of that out of the equation by limiting questions as much as possible. So the 3 avoid skills are negative talk, commands, and questions. So I get asked a lot from teachers about what to do if a child displays challenging behaviors during this 5 minutes of special playtime. So what we know is that the more that you attend to a behavior, the more that behavior is likely to continue. And so the suggestion for this 5-minute special playtime and challenging behaviors is to ignore the ignorable. And what does that mean? What is ignorable in a situation like this? Well, we can't ignore unsafe behaviors, obviously. We can't ignore behaviors that are dangerous or destructive. But what we can ignore are a lot of the behaviors that we see that are attention-seeking. Behaviors such as screaming, behaviors such as whining, or behaviors such as mild kind of aggression, things like maybe getting frustrated and throwing a toy on the floor. If it's not dangerous or if it's not destructive, it is ignorable. And active ignoring is a strategic type of ignoring that you do in the midst of a challenging behavior. And so an example of this looks like, let's say that you are playing with a child and they do get frustrated, as children often do, and they throw a toy to the floor out of frustration. What I would suggest you do is you turn your body physically away from that child and you move either towards another child if there's another child at the table, or you start a little what I like to call me party in front of you if there's no other kids to focus on, and you up your enthusiasm to the point where the child wants to join you back in your play. And so what that looks like is, oh man, I'm gonna make the biggest tower I can make out of these blocks in front of me. And I'm gonna make them on the table because that's where the toys go. And we're gonna put the blocks on top of each other, and I'm gonna make it with this block, and I'm gonna put this red block on top, and I'm gonna put this block on top. And the idea is to bring the child back with you into the play. And as soon as that child is in the play with you, then you can go back physically and move your body towards that child and give them a labeled praise for the opposite of what they had just done. So for example, let's say they threw a toy to the ground. If they started playing with you and they were keeping the toys on the table, then what you would want to do is you want to label praise them for keeping the toys on the table. Thank you so much for sharing the toys with me, keeping them on the table. I like when you're gentle with the toys. That's an example of what we would do in the case of a challenging behavior during the 5 minutes of Pride Skills. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you're interested in learning more about our service, or if you would like to make a referral for our service, the information to contact us is on the screen. We are a free service provided through the Division of Prevention and Behavioral Health Services, so please feel free to contact us for more information.